All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Hi, I am Brent Mitchell with the Quebec Labrador Foundation. Welcome to episode 3 of season 2 in our series, Voices of QLF. Before we begin, please know that this 1-hour episode is being recorded and will be posted on QLF's website. With a lot of material to cover, we will not be able to respond to questions, though feel free to say hello and make comments in the chat. And now I'd like to introduce QLF President Beth Alling, who will serve as the moderator of today's episode. Beth?
Thank you, Brent. It is a great honor to introduce our distinguished guests, who are prominent conservation leaders joining with us today from Brazil, Colombia, and Ecuador. Our guests are Denise Rambaldi, Guillermo Rodriguez-Navarro, Monica Calvopina. Could our guests please unmute your audio and video? Great, thank you. Denise is the director of the Macaé de Cima Environmental Protection Area in the state of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Among her numerous achievements, Denise is recognized for her work establishing the federally designated São João River Watershed Environmental Protection Area. Denise is lauded for expanding the habitat and protections critical to the survival of the endangered golden lion tamarin in the Atlantic coastal forests of Brazil. Guillermo is a consultant in cultural and environmental affairs in the coastal mountain region of Northern Colombia. He is the well-respected co-founder of the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta Foundation, established in 1985 to preserve the Santa Marta mountain landscape and the culture of its indigenous people. Monica is the Marine Project Coordinator of the MAS Galapagos campaign. Monica has been an integral voice for the science-based ecosystem-wide protections reflected in the recently announced major expansion of the Galapagos Islands Marine Reserve. Our lead guest and webinar host is QLF's Senior Vice President, Brent Mitchell, who over decades has dedicated his life to regional and global conservation and stewardship, beginning with QLF's first international conservation exchange programs. Brent, I now defer to you to provide a brief overview of QLF's work with alumni and partner organizations in South America over the years. Thank you.
Thanks, Beth. And again, welcome everybody. The geographic scale of our topic today, South America, is huge. Nearly 7 million square miles, 12 countries, myriad dependent territories. It's also extremely diverse, with about 450 indigenous languages alongside Spanish and Portuguese, stretching from the Panamanian land bridge at Darien to Tierra del Fuego, the land of fire. Obviously, QLF programs have not covered the continent, not even close. Unlike work in our other regions, like the Caribbean Basin, Eastern Europe, and the Balkans, our reach in our neighbor continent to the south has been more diffuse and individualistic in nature. There have been exceptions. In the early part of this century, we conducted an intensive program on citizen engagement and conservation in the Central Andean countries of Bolivia, Ecuador, and Peru. More recently, we've supported, I just got an alert. Are you here? Yeah, you're still seeing me, right? Yeah, okay.
Yes.
I got a strange alert from Zoom. All right, back to what I was saying. More recently, we've supported the Brazilian Association of Private Natural Heritage Reserves. We've responded to multiple requests for assistance in countries such as Bolivia, Chile, and Paraguay. Early in my career, I spent about a year working at a biological research station in central Venezuela. And of course, we engage with South American colleagues in international fora, such as IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. But our main outreach to the region has been in leadership development, bringing rising leaders to the Atlantic region on our long-running program of fellowships for land conservation professionals from Latin America and the Caribbean. My wife, Jessica Brown, and I led these programs, assisted by talented interns, when Jessica also worked for QLF. The fellowship began as a Caribbean Basin program in 1985, then opened to candidates from across the Americas in the mid-90s. The theory of change of the fellowship was to invest in emerging leaders by bringing them to New England in small study groups to learn from counterparts here and from their peers in the travel group. These exchanges were 4 to 6 weeks in duration and included broad exposure in a traveling seminar and a deeper case study assignment. You're about to meet 3 alumni of that program who each participated in different cohorts. I'll let them share what impact it had on them and their work, but I'm grateful for the opportunity to meet many outstanding individuals. A few returned home, scarcely to be heard from again, but most stayed in touch, reaching out with requests for further information or assistance. Many I consider to be close friends. It is always difficult to measure the impact of programs like these. Most of our alumni have had very successful careers, making valuable contributions in nature conservation and community development. But would they have done so without the QLF experience? We can't know. But in just one example, a 1996 fellow, Alberto Janoski, who unfortunately could not be with us today, he attributes the experience as giving him the courage and skills to return home and start a new organization, Guira Paraguay. Guira means bird in Guarani, the second official language of Paraguay. His organization created and maintains privately protected areas, conducts research and advocacy, and provides environmental education programs. Think of it rather as the Audubon Society of Paraguay. Alberto is not alone in such success. Our alumni in the Americas have launched new organizations, expanded conservation areas, engaged Indigenous peoples and local communities, and in turn mentored and inspired future generations of conservationists. I'll turn it back to Beth and let our friends and alumni pick up the story from here.
Thank you, Brent. That was wonderful and a perfect transition to the first part of this webinar, which is your QLF experience and how that may have impacted your career or influenced your career. And I'd like to start with you, Denise.
Oh, thank you, Betty. Thank you, Brent. And also to Jessica, please let her know. And it is a pleasure for me today to talk a little bit about my experience on QLF and the improvement that QLF experience has done in my career since the very beginning, and also in the institution where I work with. At the time I did the QLF land stewardship travel. It was on 1996, a long time ago. And at that time I was just recently assumed the coordination, the direction of the institution, the Golden Lion Tamarin Association. And our biggest challenge at that time was how to get protected habitat to reintroduce tamarins and make these habitats safe for tamarins and also for the forest and the people who had to go to the forest at that time. And this experience that I had in New England and Canada with this very small group and with Gabriela, it was Gabriela, our monitor, I guess, Gabriela Kissinger, isn't it? And that was a terrific experience for me because all the tools that we had in Brazil at that time to protect private areas was not enough, and even was not similar to the instruments, to the tools used in US at that time. And this kind of a sort of easements and private reserves, and we had public areas as parks and reserves, but it was a very strong inspiration for me and to the Golden Lion Tamarin Association. And when I come back from this seminar, this stud travel, I would say, and we decided to begin a project, a program actually, to support the creation of private reserve and also the implementation and management of private reserves with the focus of tamarins reintroduction. And at that time was very hard to get the support from private landowners because they had the feeling that once we put an endangered species, especially a primate, in their forest, probably the government would go there and take out the forest from them, and in completely disrespect of the private property. And actually, it never happened, and the government would not do this. And then we began this program, and from this program, we get the results of 22 private reserves created at the time at the federal level. And after this, the Golden Lion Tamarin Institution began to be a reference for the private reserves creation and how to get the support from the landowners. And it was not that hard once we defined the goals and the method that we would work. And having tamarins in their forest became a sort of proud to the landowners, because having tamarins means that they are really conscious and responsible, doing the right management and practices in their forests, as the tamarins are really a demanding species in terms of habitat quality. It also means that their forest is a very good and preserved forest, and it gives to them a sort of status having tamarins in their forest. So from then, we also worked with the state government to create a state program for private reserves. And the government began this program in 2009, 2008, but we didn't have at that time any law, any juridical tools to create state private reserves. So we also helped and support and discussed with the Rio de Janeiro state government to create the law for state reserves, and they did it. And they began to create state reserves. And 2 years after that, I was invited for the government of Rio de Janeiro to be a vice president of the environmental agency in Rio. And I think the QLF is part of this, has part of the responsibility of this, because you guys gave me so much inspiration and so much tools and ways to find the right way to do the private reserves work for protection of the wildlife in the Atlantic forest. By the way, I forget to say, I work at the Atlantic forest in Brazil, along the coast, the ocean coast in Brazil, which is completely different from Amazon. And most of the Brazilian population inhabited this ecosystem. So that is the reason why it is so endangered and so threatened day by day. So I guess the biggest impact was that. So I came to the state government, and I still there and working in private and also non-publicly protected areas to improve the performance of Rio de Janeiro state to reach the biodiversity goals and protect the biodiversity of the Atlantic forest. And yes, I think that is all for the beginning.
Thank you so much. And the inspiration goes both ways, because all of you inspire us. So thank you so much. And Guillermo, to you.
Well, QLF was a very big inspiration, as you say, for me. Well, after knowing all these different ways of conservation, all sorts of mechanisms to generate consciousness of conservation was very important. We were working at the beginning in the Fundación Pro Sierra Nevada, one of the first NGOs, environmental NGOs created in Colombia in 1986. So I had the opportunity to go to QLF, I think it was in 1997. And that kind of mechanisms, all what I get to know, all this different strategies they had, the community, how the community was working together, well, gave me lots of ideas, because we at the beginning were starting to unite blocks of forest, putting the community to understand the role of conservation. But then we had a change of constitution. And with the change of constitutions, the indigenous people start to gain, yes, lots of importance. And we were working to recover the indigenous land. The Nature Conservancy had a project that is to buy land for the indigenous traditional land. But when you get to know what was going on, the indigenous had their traditional territory that had a sacred geography. They had sacred sites all around. And these sites were places where they had to make offerings that they had to keep in one way or another, but that they were being invaded, well, since the 50s, since the 60s, 40s, 50s, all this territory of the Sierra Nevada that was isolated before started to be invaded with campesinos that came because the violence in Colombia started and started to live in these areas. So we were trying to really make ways to recover the biodiversity of the Sierra Nevada, because on top of all this situation, we had marijuana cultivations and coca cultivation. So those were really affecting all the forest and really scaring the indigenous people away from certain areas. So we had to work very strong with indigenous people and really start to understand their sense of conservation in order to really be able to make something. So learning a little bit about the indigenous people, well, I start working with Jessica Brown and linking nature and culture and seeing how the importance of the sacred sites were so important for the conservation. And well, linking these two big ideas was something very important that in a way, I really learned and got involved with all these people of nature and culture and all this through QLF. And on top of that, well, we had from the Fundación Pro Sierra, there were other persons that were going to the internship. And that was very important, basically to work with the communities and make them aware of the importance of keeping connections between the blocks of forest that still remained. I think that is basically what I have been working afterwards in all this connection of sacred sites. And the last last thing that I was doing was working on a decree that the president did in 2018. Yes, he when he was finishing his presidency, he wrote the decree of the black line. This black line is considered the territory, the ancestral territory of the indigenous. So there was a decree and a support of the government to acknowledge the property of all this land. Even though, well, there's lots of conflicts and all this, but well, they have a support that recognizes their land.
Great. Thank you. Monica, could you talk about your QLF experience and impact of it?
Thank you, Beth. Yeah, well, I just was finishing my studies as marine biologist at that time, and then working in research in the marine reserve here in Galapagos. And I had the opportunity to join the coastal and marine management training course with QLF. I think that was very important for my career because I went to the New England area with colleagues to study case of studies in all the coast. And that was very important for me because I saw a lot of examples of management and conservation there. One important thing was to see how in that area you work with the stakeholders. I think was very important to see the examples, for example, the examples of management with fisheries, for example, the lobster management there. Another case like you had like citizen science there too. So for me, it was very important that examples. And then when I came back to Galapagos, I had some ideas because we were just starting with the original marine reserve and work with the stakeholders. So all that examples help to organize work here. And the other important thing that happened in that training course was that I met some colleagues from all Latin America. And I think that is very important because you start to make some connections with other professionals, and all of them have a lot of experiences and a lot of knowledge in different areas. So then you have a lot of contacts to work with in the future too. In Galapagos, since then, I went to the training in 2001. Since then, I think we have a lot of work with the Marine Reserve, and all that work with the stakeholders has been improving during the years. And that reflects that now we actually are expanding the Marine Reserve because that work is giving some results and positive results, because we are connecting different areas as the research, as the work with the stakeholders, the work with government. So I think all the variables are connecting now, and I think we are getting some big and nice results. For me, the QLF experience, as I said, was the starting point in my career, give me a lot of knowledge. And then after that, I went for my master's degrees too. So all that was a positive experience, but was something that inspired, because I saw a lot of things that you can do in the future. So that was a starting point.
Thank you so much. So moving on to our first discussion, each of you has played a major role in a regional conservation success story. Could you describe why and how you've engaged local communities, especially Indigenous peoples, in your signature conservation efforts? I'd like to begin with you, Guillermo.
Well, something that we learned about all this experience, and while trying to reproduce some of the ideas you came back from the QLF program, was trying to, well, put the Indigenous together, try them to understand the importance of conservation. And what we found out is that their traditional knowledge it was more important, and we had to learn from them instead of trying to get involved in trying to put some corridors or things like that. They had another sense of conservation through all this sacred geography that they have in the Sierra Nevada of Santa Marta. So it's something that I got involved afterwards in all this importance of the sacred sites and the connection between the sacred land and the conservation, and how all these offerings had a sense. Yes, sometimes it was like one kind of offerings was like cleaning the the little trees of some wood that they were going to use in the forest. Someone was times that they didn't hunt certain animals. They had different ways to make offerings and different ways to do things in order to preserve the nature. Their basic the important thing for the indigenous people is the conservation of nature. So they work a lot in conserving this area that they call the heart of the world. And they make all these gatherings and all these groups in order to give strength to this area, because it's the Sierra Nevada is a mountain 150 kilometers around, and is the highest mountain in the coast. It's only 45 kilometers from the coast. You have the snow peaks. So you have all the diversity, you have all the endemic species that you want, because on top of that, you have the highest number of birds, because you have the migrant birds, everything. You have all the problems of the country as well. But it was very important for me, that experience in QLF, yes, to, well, have an approach more of how linking this nature and culture was so important.
Thank you. And Denise, on to you.
Thank you, Betty. So the work with the private landowners was a main way that we find to involve the local communities, besides the environmental education with the students and also with professors at the Golden Lion Tamarind Association. And once we had the landowner support and permission to reintroduce tamarins in their lands, it was a little bit easier for us to introduce some more complex concepts in environmental conservation. And we decided to talk only about tamarins at the very beginning, to not scare them, because they had a lot of improvements to do in their farm, in their reserves, but they could be resistant if we began to demand some works from them in the very beginning. So we started with reintroduction, and then the lack of connectivity in between protected small fragments, the same thing that Guillermo just spoke about corridors, about forest corridors, how to put all these small fragments of forest together, and to make it suitable to a golden lion tamarin meta population, because they constitute a meta population that has to be reproducing in between the fragments and the remnants. So we started to ask the permission to plant just small trees, just a line of trees for tamarins, and they began to, yes, you can plant just one line of tree from here, because we were crossing their pasture with forest, and it demands fences and some maintenance and this kind of thing. And well, nowadays we have more than 20,000 hectares of forest protected and connected for the golden lion tamarin meta population. And when we began the efforts with the golden lion tamarins, there were only 250 tamarins in the wild. And nowadays we have 2,000 almost 2,000. And we had some problems in the past with the yellow fever. We lost a lot of tamarins about 3 or 4 years ago. And I'm not working there, but I'm part of the group of the tamarins people who are thinking the future of the tamarins. So we began to vaccinate tamarins. A Brazilian institution, the same one which is producing COVID vaccina in Rio de Janeiro state, developed a vaccina for yellow fever for the tamarins. And so nowadays, almost the entire population is vaccinated against this virus, which is really, really dangerous for them. And we also engaged the local communities, as I said, students. And oh yes, the farmers also began to be interested on doing ecotourism in their private reserves. So we support the business plan for some reserves. In some of them, we also habituated one group of tamarins in each reserve. And we had 3 at that time, 3 groups of tamarins habituated to the human presence. So people, ecotourists, could go there and see the tamarins and get involved in the efforts to preserve and protect the Atlantic forest. And at the state level nowadays, we still have our program on private reserves. And in the Macaé de Cima public area where I work with, we are also work with agriculture, sustainable agriculture, agroforestry systems, and ecotourism, because it is a way for people to get money and keep their forest, stand up forest and make some money with that to support their livelihoods in the area. Otherwise, they could go out of this incredible forest. And another result of this was that we tried to, when we going back to the Golden Lion tamarins, we tried to plant one specific corridor, but the landowners, and that area was not a private reserve, and the landowner said to us, no, you will not plant anything in here. If you want to plant, you're going to have to buy the forest, to buy the pasture, and to buy the entire land to do conservation. He was really against everything talking about environmental. So the Golden Lion Tamarin association decided to buy this small piece of area, and we bought it. We raised the money, and most of the money come from the United States. And we raised the money, we bought the area, and we put this area, we increased a public reserve that was set in that place already. And we increased about 200 hectares of protected areas and planted the biggest corridor that we had in the Atlantic forest nowadays. And in the recent past, about 2 years ago, we inaugurated the first forest bridge over a highway in Brazil, and this bridge is devoted to the Golden Lion Tamarin to cross this highway. So it is also a model for the entire Brazil, and we engage the government at the time. We engage private companies who are building the road, the highway in this effort. And it was a very, very strong struggle to get this bridge done in the licensing process. So that's it.
Thank you. And Monica, to you.
Thank you, Beth. Well, in Galapagos, since we created the Galapagos Marine Reserve, the original one in 2000, I think we realized that it's very important to engage all the community because they are the users of the marine reserve and they have to be involved in all the decisions. We realize that sometimes it takes more time to make a decision or to make an agreement if we work together, but it's better because then you can implement the decisions in a better way because we all are agreed. Here in Galapagos, as representatives, as stakeholders, we have different sectors. We have the fishermen, we have the tourist sector, and we have the conservation sector. So always when we are working in some decisions, not just for the marine reserve, but for the national park, we try to include all the stakeholders for that. And in that stakeholders, we engage the community too. For the actual marine reserve and then for the new one, the one that was expanded now, it was very important, the role of the community. In 2017, the community actually was the first one who made a letter for the president in Ecuador, regarding this issue, that it will be very important to expand the actual marine reserve. And I think that was very good because it was not a sector like conservation or fishermen, was all the community together that realized the importance of the increasing the conservation in the marine reserve. So I think it's very important. During the last 20 years, we have been working with all the stakeholders for many management tools, as the zoning scheme for the Galapagos Marine Reserve, the management plan for the marine reserve, and then we are involving all the actors in the process. So I think that's a good example. In Galapagos, we have a lot of representatives of people that came from the mainland in Ecuador living here. So we have a good representation of the people that came to Galapagos and create this new town that we have. And I think we have the representation from many places in Ecuador, and that is why it's very rich. The culture is very rich, all the ideas that you have in this new area of a population here in the islands. And I think it's very important to take into account all that for the decisions and the management and conservation.
Thank you. I'm going to stay with you, Monica, for the next discussion. I want to hear your thoughts and everyone's thoughts on lessons learned while creating or expanding a protected area.
Yeah, as I mentioned, Beth, it was a starting point from the community. We had an event, a very big event here in Galapagos in 2017. We had a big boat from China that was captured inside the Galapagos Marine Reserve. And that boat had a lot of sharks and shark fins and had a lot of, fishes and everything inside that big boat. We are talking about these industrial fishing boats. That boat was inside the marine reserve, and I think the community felt very bad about that because here in Galapagos and in other places, for sure, we are making a lot of efforts to preserve some sites and to conserve for a sustainable future, and then you have the illegal activities. That is why we started that idea of that it is very important to increase the protection, because I think during the last years here in Galapagos, we had the opportunity to collect a lot of information, doing some research and doing management. So we have a lot of information that showed that the actual marine reserve was not enough to protect some species, because now, after a lot of knowledge, we see that a lot of species as sharks are connected with other regions, not just in Galapagos, but they are connected with other regions in Colombia, in Costa Rica, in Panama. So we see that it's very important to make efforts of conservation regionally, not just in Galapagos. That is why we asked for this expansion, and I think the community made the agreement to propose. And then we started with this campaign that we call Más Galapagos. Más Galapagos is a collective group, but in that collective group, we have a lot of NGOs representatives, we have private representatives, we have universities, from the academia, and we have people from the government too. So the idea of this collective is that show that you don't have to be from just one side of the area, like government or private or NGO, but I think putting all together that pieces, you are stronger to make an to make a positive agreement and ask the government for something. So we integrate all the pieces, like the research and knowledge. We integrated technical advice, we integrated the community knowledge too. And then I think we had this strong proposal and we had the positive effects now just a couple of months ago, no, 1 month ago at the COP in Glasgow, when the president from Ecuador gave the great news to the expansion for the marine reserve. And I think was a lot of work during the last 3-4 years, but I think we can show that all the efforts and different sectors can put together an idea and will be stronger for a better result.
Yes, so exciting. Guillermo.
Well, indigenous knowledge, yes, has been an important contribution to sustainability in a way that is something that I've been working on and promoting. We had, well, at the first, this decree where they recognized the indigenous territory. By the other way, we as Fundación ProSierra have been supporting very much, yes, the indigenous people and how they can involve really and managing their own territories and their own areas. And indigenous people had made important moves. Well, this thing of the decree was a very important move. They have some films, yes, saying what are they want to know, let the people know how they think, what for them is conservation, how you should preserve, yes, and try to make people understand, because, well, Sierra Nevada is such a fragile ecosystem, because as I told you, it has all the diversity, all the endemism that you want. So it's a very fragile area, and there it seems that the indigenous people are the only ones aware of this fragility. So they're trying to make big efforts to let their knowledge go to the world. So that's why they made these films. There's one of them, Alumni, that you can find in Netflix. And there's another one they made almost 30 years ago by the BBC. Yes, from the heart of the world, the elder brothers speak. And now the last thing they have done, in which I have participated, is going through all these sacred sites and trying to understand what is the way that all this conservation works. And they produced this new book that is called Shiwankala, is the cry of Mother Earth. And it's made with scientists, with environmentalists, with biologists, and with indigenous leaders trying to make something a little bit academic. Yes, so the people start saying, well, the indigenous people have the reason of how the way they act, the way they preserve, and don't look at them as foolish people, because they say, oh, this is a sacred site. What's the sacred thing of this? It's the water mouth, yes, where they're building a hotel, and it's the place where all the fishes nest, yes. So we're losing yes. So all these sacred sites that maybe the society, the normal society, considers foolish, yes, it has a reason, and they try to explain it through all these things about how it is so important to preserve Mother Earth. And they're always telling us, well, like, you change everything for dollars, but we don't change anything for dollars. We have to preserve Mother Earth. That is what is giving us all the resources we need. So that has been a learning and a way that has sent me through that way. Yes, trying to understand how these indigenous people think, and really this you find evidence of that. They have very good stewards of their own territory, and we should learn a little bit from them as well.
Wonderful. Denise, before you address the same topic, I want to let our viewers know that as a special add-on today, you'll be sharing your thoughts and photographs of a recent trip to Socotra, the isolated archipelago off the coast of Yemen. Socotra is often thought of as the Galapagos Island of the Indian Ocean. On to you, Denise, for the question on your thoughts and lessons learned.
Oh,
First.
yes. Following about the local communities, in the area where I'm working with today, it is a IUCN category 6, I guess. It is private area, but protected by the state government, which means some restrictions on land use. So most of the things that the landowners want to do in their land, except small and traditional agriculture, plots of agriculture, all the other issues, they do need a licensing. So we also provide orientation, guiding, and also the licensing for as a government state, the licensing for production alternatives, production activities. And tourism is one of the major economic activity in the area, in the Macaé de Cima area. It is the springs of Macaé River, which is a very important river in the Rio de Janeiro state, not only for fishing, but also for tourism and also for oil basin at the Macaé city. The city where I work with is Nova Friburgo, New Freiburg, founded by Switzerland people in the emperor time. It is a very traditional way to cultivate the areas to produce organic food. So it is very famous in the state as a pole of organic vegetables. And oh, those are the tamarinds. Somebody was asking about these guys. Just a parenthesis, tamarinds are endemic from Atlantic forest, and they are pretty small, small like a cat, and they are really gold, a red gold animal. They are really wonderful animals, and their ecology and their behavior are similar to ours. And they are territorialists. Each family, they live on families, and each family needs about in between 50 and 80 hectares of protected and then preserved forest. They are omnivorous, they eat everything, and they reproduce once a year. They have twins, which are so teeny and beautiful. And they are really, really smart animals, and a very, very good tool for conservation. It's really easy to get the attention of people to protect this wonderful creature. And protecting tamarins, we are also protecting us and snakes, which most of the people don't like, and birds and all these elements, these crucial elements in the forest, and also the process that those elements make part. For instance, tamarins are gardeners. They plant forests everywhere because they eat so many fruits, and they will leave the seeds in the soil. So protect tamarins was a very strong lesson for me and for the institution that I work, the Golden Lion Tamarin Association, and we learned a lot from QLF at that time, and we are still learning from the colleagues and from QLF people as well. And the young ones, as in this picture, they are really important for us to to help us to protect the Atlantic forest to the next generation and improve our performance as government and as conservationists, how to do this in a better way. And just talking a little bit about Socotra. Socotra was a recent travel that I did. It was a holiday trip. And I was really impressed about the situation in Socotra. It is a very small island with more than 800 endemic species, and most of them flora species. And this tree that you can see is the Dracena cinnamomum, and it is the symbol of Socotra Island. This island belongs to Yemen, and Yemen, it is located in Indian Ocean, nearby the Horn of Africa in Somalia, and below the Arabic world. Somebody described the Socotra Island as the forgotten footnote of Arabic world, and it is. It is an island that was forgotten. That is the reason why it is well protected, well preserved yet, but a lot of threat is in sight in Socotra. And the most serious issue that I have seen there is garbage everywhere, plastic garbage everywhere, in the middle of the Dracena forests, in the middle, even the vultures, those guys are the Egyptian vultures. They learn how to eat plastic, and they are eating plastics. And some individuals has found a diet for this reason. As well, the goats. The Portuguese tried, actually they I guess that is the word, I don't know. They got the power of the island during two centuries, in the century 15 and 16. And they took a lot of biodiversity from there. And they took a latex, the gum of Dracena cinnamomum, which is the common name of Dracena cinnamomum is the blood of dragon, because this gum is a red, it's sort of blood, that is the tree. And most of the trees in the island are scarred, and they have these marks of the extraction of this gum. And the goats are eating the baby ones, the cinnamomum baby ones. There is no regeneration of this forest. That is Dixon Highlands, where the only place in the world where you can find this kind of forest. It is the Dracena again, and only there you can see some trees which has not been object of extraction yet, but they are, well, it is a very important economic, it was not today, but it used to be a very important economic activity for the people from Socotra, but not nowadays. And this species is in the brink of extinction because of this unsustainable use and because of the introduced species, which is the goats. And UNESCO has recognized Socotra as a World Heritage Site, but I guess that it is only in the paper. There is nothing in the field that you can identify it is a protected area. So, and I did my best to understand if there is a system of protected areas in Yemen, but the country is really, really closed. You can't have access. I didn't get any access to information, so I don't know if there are private reserves there, but probably not. So it's just to get, my intention is just to get the attention of you guys and the audience to this small piece of land in the middle of the Indic Ocean. Thank you, Betty, and
Thank you
excuse
so
me to
much.
take this long time.
Thank you so much. In the 5 remaining minutes, if each of you could take 1 minute to share with us any message of hope you have in this decade where conservation is so critical. And I'd like to begin with you, Monica.
Sure. Thank you, Beth. Well, I think we are at the moment in a very crucial point for the conservation of land and oceans. And here in Galapagos, very aware of that. That is why we took that step of increasing the protection of the marine reserve. But I think that is, worldwide. We identified, and Ecuador is part of this initiative, 2030, and that looks for the protection of the ocean of the 30% of the oceans by the 2030. So we are part of that initiative, but I think for the landscapes is the same. We are in the era of restoration. Here in Galapagos, we have a lot of projects restoring areas that were damaged in the past years for all the anthropogenic impacts. So my message is that more than conservation, we have to restore the ecosystems from now on. So the oceans and land needs all the efforts. And I see that here in this webinar, we are representatives from some places, important places in the world. And I think it's very nice to see all of them and, keep in contact and make efforts together for all that nice objectives for conservation.
Thank you. And Guillermo.
Well, again, the indigenous knowledge is something that is a contribution for sustainability. Try to learn a little bit about their mechanisms and their ways of consumptions, their ways of using the land. And well, something that they don't have is this opulence and this extreme waste and use of things. They're very austeric, if you can call it that. Austeros. Yes, they don't use much things. You perhaps look at them and you see that they look like poor, like dirty, but basically no, they're people very wise, very careful of their environment, and that is becoming in a way something trendy in this area. So people are starting to listen at this indigenous knowledge through the way they insist so much, and they know how to manage things, and that we are the little brothers doing everything wrong.
Okay, thank you, Denise.
So just a few words to the younger people to be inspired by the work and the mission of the QLF and also the institutions that we are representing here. And I hope in that way we can live a better and healthier and sustainable world for the next generation. So youngest one, we are in your hands. Take care of the world for us also. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally to you, Brent.
Thanks, Beth. First, let me acknowledge that it's not easy to be hopeful these days. News of a failing planet seems to get worse by the day, but we can't lose hope. And as you said at the beginning, Beth, the inspirational learning goes both ways. I continue to be inspired by Monica, Guillermo, Denise, and the many others that they represent. And one of the advantages of the fellowship program was that it had a retreat quality. Participants were largely cut off from quotidian concerns of their organizations before email and easy communications made it more difficult to truly get away. And at first I lamented that, but now I embrace the tools that let us connect instantaneously around the world like we're doing right now. And if we can connect these ways of working quickly, with a long-term view, with a 7 generations vision of stewardship, then we have a chance to turn things around.
Thank you. Just so everyone knows, I've been looking at the chat room and there's a lot of positive feedback on all these presentations, and cannot thank you all enough for being a part of this episode. It's been a great honor for me and for QLF. Our next episode is February 17th. We'll return to our roots on the Quebec North Shore, along the Gulf of St. Lawrence and into Labrador. Thank you for being with us, and best wishes for the holiday and especially the new year. Take care.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye, thank you, and the same for
Bye,
Laura.
thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.